My name is Raya. I was born in Iran, and I left with my family in 1969 to the United States. We actually migrated. Some of us migrated earlier, some of us later, but I migrated in 1969 to the United States. We migrated to the US basically for education, better opportunities, and a change of lifestyle that some of us had desired. So we migrated for various different reasons. My oldest brother migrated first, then another brother, then my father, my mother, then myself, then another brother. It's basically, we're 3 brothers and 2 sisters. So we migrated over a span of 15 years to the United States. Actually starting in 1959. I moved there in 1969.
What did you do while you were in the United States?
To begin with, I started going to the university to study, and after about a couple of years, because I was active in business with my brothers, I made pretty good money, so I decided what's the point of getting a degree, because I was already there making good money. So I left the studies and basically I worked with my brothers for a while. And then later I had my own business, had a clothing store. And then later I got in the business of real estate, got a broker's license. I had my own office, and I was very successful. And I was in my 20s. I was driving a Rolls Royce, had a beach home. I traveled around the world, and basically it looks like I had it all. I was considered a successful young lady.
And then after that?
After many years of tasting good life, fame and glory, and all the things that I wanted, or a young person wanted, of course I have to say that I had really secularized. I had forgotten about Islam. I had forgotten about my background. I lived like everybody else, and thought like everybody else. And after a while, I started feeling life was empty. This materialism, it was not something that was completely fulfilling for me. So I started looking and searching for something deeper than that.
So you mentioned about secularization there. What was your religious background prior to coming to the US, and then when you first came to the US?
My family were Muslims when we lived in Iran, but it was at the time of Shah. He really did not encourage people to study Islam, practice Islam. So we were really, I would say, secular Muslims. So we adhere to basic Islamic principles, but we were not really religious. Then when we moved to the United States, we still had the identity, like the basic identity as Muslims, but basically really lived secular life. We pretty much, all of us, got married to different people, foreigners, either German or Americans, and we all got divorced. We all had children. So our life became like the life of everybody else in the United States.
Okay, so you just mentioned about marriage there. Could you speak quickly about your husband and what that marriage was like, how you met, what happened during the marriage?
I met my husband in a real estate seminar. We were both real estate brokers. We thought this is a very excellent match, and we were attracted to each other. And basically, we had some conversation about, having a life together, and before you know it, we were married. And there were no question about the spiritual life. We basically were very involved with the material life. We ended up having 2 children. And it was becoming more and more clear that we were not right for each other. Why is this? Because I was more leaning towards more spirituality, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And besides that, he basically had, maybe I should say, a typical American thought, ideology that the husband works, the wife works. That's what he expected. And then within the 4 years, I already had 2 babies, 2 children. And I think maybe this is the time I really felt like I wanted to be home. I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to be a wife. I wanted to be supported, not worry about dealing with clients and show houses and everything anymore. And he was not the doer, he was the thinker. So the doer stopped doing, the thinker was not providing. I remember I was nursing my baby. She was like 8 months old. I was trying to write $1 million contract, real estate contract in a hospital, selling a hospital from one doctor to another doctor. And I had a towel over my shoulder, nursing an 8-month-old baby and writing $1 million contract. And the doctor looked at me and says, "You must be Middle Eastern, because an American mother would just leave the child at home with a babysitter and take care of the child, somebody else, and you're doing this." I said, "Well, the child is important, I have to have the child with me." But this, basically, the problem grew further and further with my husband, because I literally was not able to do as much as I was doing when I was not married. And our finances really collapsed and got to a point where there was no other way. I did not want to stay in that marriage, so our marriage ended.
So you'd say it ended because of finances?
Our marriage ended not because of just finances, because there was no common spiritual goal with us. I was going one direction, he was going another direction. I even remember for our honeymoon we went to Tahiti. I was diving and he was playing volleyball. The whole time we didn't spend much time together. I should have known right there and then we're not even compatible at our honeymoon. Anyhow, he didn't want to have anything to do. At the time when we got married, I was really into Christianity. I was going to church. His mother was going to church. His father didn't want to have anything to do with it. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. He didn't care. His idea was, about the children, let them grow up, expose them to everything, and let them grow up and decide for themselves. I would remind him that the book of Proverbs was talking about train a child in the way he should go, so when he grows up he would not part from it. It did not say expose the children to anything and everything and let them grow up and decide. So we definitely had differences about child rearing and differences about the spirituality, difference about finances. It got to a point where pretty much we had nothing in common.
You mentioned earlier that you, early on in the marriage, and you kind of covered it there, you got more in touch with your spiritual side and into spirituality. Why, kind of two-part question, why do you think you got more into spirituality during that time in your life? And second part, can you describe the different spiritual and religious assets that you explored during that time?
I think the reason why I became attracted to spirituality was because I saw the emptiness in the material and secular world. I felt like I saw all the people that were around me, my friends, the conversations we had, the things we were interested, they were really empty, did not have any substance to it. There was no God in it. There was, there was maybe a little bit of peace, but really not much. And I also, the peace was an empty peace. It had to do, like if I had some material, something that I was looking for, if I had it, I had peace, and then of course I would want something else. And I was not the only one. It seems like this was a common thing. But I really wanted more in life than all this material thing. I already had what I wanted in my 20s. So I started really looking for spirituality, and I was hoping to marry someone who would have similar goals. And I thought that my husband did have similar goals. But during our marriage and difficulties that I had with this marriage, it really caused me a lot of health issues. I have all kinds of health problems. And by the time the marriage ended, I would say I was really health-wise a basket case. I was not in good shape. So I started looking. It seems like whenever I saw peace in people's eyes, I thought whatever religion they have, that's what I want, because the peace is what I didn't have, really. I was in really bad shape. So I really got attracted to Hinduism because they really were peaceful people. I really liked it. I got into it. I got into meditation. I got into many things that they were involved with. I read their books. I read their mantras. And then I realized they are worshiping so many gods. And they're not worshiping just one God, worshiping many gods. And when I started thinking about it, I said, what am I doing here? I do believe there's only one God, even though I may have peace, but this may be a false peace for me. I need to look some more. But I had really open mind, and I really was attracted to Buddhism as well. So I thought to check that out. When I checked Buddhism, I benefited a lot. I felt peace, a lot of wisdom in the teachings, Buddhism teaching. But then I realized similar problems, but even more complex. Some Buddhists believe there is no God. Some Buddhists believe that there are many, many gods. Some Buddhists worship Buddha as God, which he never asked people to do that. Then I realized the first book of Buddhism was written 500 years after Buddha passed away. So I thought, well, this is not for me. I should look. I must say that I also joined the New Age ideology, which is prevalent up until today in the US, which basically attention is on the self, that we're gods, we know everything, we can determine our own destination. Many things about that. Part of it I liked just because I was among the people that I liked to be. That was in Mount Shasta, that's where I had moved at the time. And that was the mind of many people. But I could never consider myself or anyone else God, but just the one true God. So I moved from there to Hawaii. There, it was more like every day we woke up early and to the sunrise, and we asked the sun to give us its light and take away darkness from us. We did this every morning. Then I realized this is really sun worshipping, and this is not what I believe. Why should I ask sun? I should ask God who created the sun. Soon I realized this group is not the right group for me. Then I joined Christianity. I was with the Christians for 7.5 years, and I must say that it really felt so right for me, because I noticed that their morality was what felt right. Because before that, most of the religions, ideology I joined, whoever it was, whatever feels right is right. So people attracted with each other. It's okay to have sex and even have children with each other. No questions asked, no problem. Nobody considered sin. There was no such thing as sin. Everything is right if it feels right. But with the Christians, I noticed that they really adhere to the Word of God, adhere to the laws of God. And I felt that was really the right thing for me. The only problem I had with Christianity was the issue of Trinity, because I could not worship Jesus as God. I could not believe 3 in 1. The Trinity was an odd thing, even though I really studied. I was even going to the university, Seventh-day Adventist University, Pacific Union College, studying theology. This is how interested I was in Christianity. I had read everything and anything and the explanations about Trinity, and nothing could satisfy me that the God of creation created everything would die on the cross. He died on the cross. Who would run the universe? There's so many things that were just contradictory to God dying on the cross, to then feel what it's like to die as a man. Well, he created man. He knows it's like, I don't want to get into this because this issue is by itself is a long issue. This issue caused me to think twice about Christianity and to become baptized as a Christian, because until now, 7 years, I was not baptized. When the pastor asked me if I wanted to be baptized, I asked him for a few days to reconsider. He said, okay. So that's when I opened the Quran for the first time in many years. My husband and I, first husband, he was American and he had to become Muslim for me to marry. This is all I knew, that a Muslim woman cannot marry a non-Muslim man. So he had no problem with it. He became Muslim. My Islam was nothing I was not practicing. He was not practicing. So he became Muslim, then we forgot about it. We bought the Quran, we put it on the shelf. Then when I opened the Quran for the first time, after all these years, and I read the verses when God tells us that in every verse we start with beginning, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Right there, it was telling me how gracious and merciful God is, because He is continuously telling us and reminding us how gracious and merciful He is. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Praise be to the Lord of the world. This is a 7-verse chapter, first chapter, that really brought me back to Islam. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, most gracious, most merciful, Maliki Yawmiddin, the owner of the day of judgment. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. This means you alone we worship, and from you alone we seek help. This is like incredible. This is incredible. God, the Creator, is telling us, teaching us that we should only ask Him alone. Ask help from Him and only worship Him. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. That means guide us to the straight path. Sirat al-ladhina an'amta alayhim ghayr al-maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. That means the path of those whom you have bestowed your mercy, not those who have angered you nor have gone astray. Really, when I read this, I basically passed out.
اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
I don't know for how long. When I came to myself, I realized that after 15 years of searching for God, I have finally found Him. Then I started reading the Quran. I read the verses about the Jesus, where God, explained that Jesus was the Word of God, He was the Prophet of God, and He was the servant of God, that we must not associate partners with God, and that not say Trinity, and there's only one God.
أهل الكتاب لا تغلوا في دينكم ولا تقولوا على الله إلا الحق إنما المسيح عيسى ابن مريم رسول الله وكلمته ألقاها إلى مريم وروح منه فآمنوا بالله ورسله ولا تقولوا ثلاثة انتهوا خيرا لكم إنما الله إله واحد سبحانه أن يكون له ولد له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وكفى بالله وكيلا. Anyhow,
long story, but to make it short of it, I decided I'm going to investigate the compilation of the Quran and the compilation of the Bible, two holy books. Why are there contradictions? And then I realized, after the really in-depth study, I realized that the Bible was actually compiled 325 years after Jesus. The Council of Trinity, the Council of Nicaea, how Trinity was basically coined at the time. And then the Quran, on the other hand, was memorized by the Prophet's companion at the time while he was alive, and it was written and it was put together while he was alive, and then put into a form of the book that we have today by the third Khalifa, successor after the Prophet, peace be upon him. not one letter, not even a vowel has been changed from that time. This is 1400 years. Nothing has been changed. Whereas we cannot claim that there's any holy book that exists up until today that it has the same integrity as far as being intact. So anyway, this is why I returned to Islam, and I feel like my life has never been the same since I returned.
You mentioned that you tried a lot of different religions prior to finding Islam. As you were raised in as a loose Muslim, why do you think it took you so long to return to Islam?
You know, sometimes we grow up in a family that they have certain religion or they follow certain thing, but the spirituality, the deep spirituality doesn't sit in the heart of a child or a young person. Basically, we take on a title because our parents gave it to us, and that is true with all religions, you know. Children take the religion of the parents. So I inherited Islam from my parents, and without really understanding Islam, other than the moral issues, even though in US I became secular, I know that I adhere to a lot of the moral standards that we grew up with. Not all the way, but as much as I could. I had some consciousness about it. But in US, religion didn't matter. It just, what mattered was to be with the secular society and be like everybody else. And then when I came and joined other religions, honestly, I found these people really had more peace. No matter what religion I joined, adherents had more peace than secular people, because they had at least certain principles to follow according to their religion, according to their belief. So it was not like go anywhere to the left and right and to take whatever. The ones that were more serious, they really took it serious, and they adhered to their books, they adhered to their principle. I like this. I like this limitation, because I saw the result of it in the adherents themselves. Especially when I came to Christianity, it was wonderful. I saw people had more peace, less divorces, you know, more community connection, people connected with each other, families connected, and relatives were connected with each other. It was not a like life, this is like me. It's like, it's all about me. It was about the society. And then when I came to Islam, I was able to then finally connect with Muslims, and took a while. I noticed how close they are, how connected they are, families are with each other, how important it was for them to follow God's ways. So I decided I'm finally home.
Is there a reason that you tried other religions first prior to going back to Islam? Was that a conscious decision, or maybe you came across other people, for example, who introduced you to other things beforehand?
I cannot answer that. I was looking for peace, and I was looking for God. So the first person that would come on my path that had peace in their face, whatever they had, I wanted. And so it happened that at that time the Hinduism was very prevalent in US. The Beatles had gone to India, and they had come back, and they had all these songs, and it seems like for the young people this was an in thing. So I tried it, and really, I was willing to be a Hindu. I was really, truly, just if this was going to bring me to God and bring me peace, I was willing to be a Hindu. When I see their idolatry in it, go to Buddhism. I wanted to be a Buddhist. Same problem, worshiping other gods? No, not me. Sun worship. Everything that I went wholeheartedly, was willing to adhere to it. It was not, I didn't plan anything. It seems like God wanted me to taste all this religion at a time when I was not judgmental. Because if somebody asked me to go sit with the Buddhists today, I wouldn't even go, because I know what it's all about. But I went with open heart, open mind, loved the people, loved everything. Went there, then I realized this is not it. So I think God wanted me to go through all these different stages, and to finally come to Islam, realize that this base of this religion is flawless, because this is the book of God that was dictated by God to Prophet Muhammad through Angel Gabriel. It was written, it was preserved. And the interesting thing is the message of the Quran is a continuation of message that is in the Old Testament and the New Testament that is continued, brought to the Quran. Because I used to read the Old Testament, New Testament continuously. I finished and I go to the beginning. Finished because I came to know God through the Old Testament, really, because how God described himself, his favor upon the children of Israel, how he sent prophets, how people followed God's commandment. God gave them victory, and then when they left God, God let them be overcome by the enemies. It just has been like a continuous process ever since then. And then in the Quran, God tells us about the same stories in abbreviated form in order to remind us this is the same God, the same laws. When we follow, we are successful. When we don't follow, we are not. So I look at all of this religion, look back, and I say, if anyone takes the time and study religions as much as I did, they would come running to Islam and want to adhere to it with all their life and all their might. And this is where I ended up. And I was so happy and so much at peace to do that.
So you've mentioned several times about kind of the deep research and study that you did. Could you, in a bit more detail, kind of maybe some specifics, exactly what kind of research and what kind of study did you do when you, I guess, first of all came to Islam, then since you've been a committed Muslim?
I did a lot of research about the biblical compilation, and I did some of this research at the university itself, the Christian university itself. And a lot of it had to do with reading various different books that is not written by Muslims, and realizing that, for example, the Council of Nicaea, 325 years after Jesus, by that time there were more than 300 Gospels written about Jesus. And the 4 Gospels that were chosen, the other ones were basically banned, and anybody that was found with them, they were crucified or they were burned alive. I love Jesus, I loved him, I still love him. He said, love your enemy. He said, if your enemy pulled you 1 mile, go an extra mile. Why would the adherents of Jesus burn other Christians that don't believe that he was God, but that don't believe that, in the message of Trinity, why should they be put to death? I mean, I saw the atrocities done to the early Christians just because they did not believe in the Trinity. Anyhow, the more I read, the more I realized that, yes, the Bible has a lot of God's word in it, but it is not purely God's word, because it has been changed by men. The doctrines have been changed. This was enough for me to then put my research into the Quran. Like I mentioned, it is authentic. There's no book more authentic than that. The enemies of Islam, they can look all they want to find faults because they think verses out of context without really having deep understanding. But my research about the religions and about other religions basically brought me to Islam, and choosing that as my final religion that I'm going to and hope that my children will also follow.
What can you specifically say kind of what the name of the Christian university was, and then you just kind of said research, so would you say it was a lot of personal research in your own time? Did you go to any specific kind of experts on Islam? Did you go to any Islamic universities, courses, things like that? Yeah, just what was your research methodology?
I went to Pacific Union College, which is in Angwin and Napa Valley, and studied theology, Christian theology. They had a library. It's probably one of the largest Christian library in the country. They usually adhered, the Seventh-day Adventists, they adhere to the teachings of Ellen G. White, who had really fantastic health messages, which up to today they stay with. Also, she claimed that she received a revelation from angels, and she had dreams. And I went to that library and I asked them, could you please, they had everything that related to Seventh-day Adventists, to Ellen G. White. Ask them to show me anything and anything you can possibly find that the angels told her that Jesus was God or Son of God, or that she had a dream about that. There was none. There was none. And of course, Ellen White, according to their teaching, she got many of her writing borrowed from other writings, and she included, not that she claimed that these are her writing, but as part of her belief, she brought in other writings included in her own writing. So that was one of the, because I was with the Seventh-day Adventists, this was part of my research to realize about the Trinity, that yes, I was going on the right direction. I have later on, many years later, I did do Islamic studies, 4 years of Islamic studies at the university, Islamic Online University, and got a bachelor's degree from that. And through that, I was able to do a lot more research and studies about Quran, compilation of the Quran, various different books. We have teachings of Prophet Muhammad that has been passed on through various different channels, how authentic they are, how they have been, labeled weak, strong, a part, a chain missing. This is how even his teaching were treated. Besides the Quran, that we think this is 100% authentic, we have teachings, his teaching that has been passed on to us by various different narrators, but these narrators have also been classified by the scholars and how we are supposed to treat them. Are these weak? Maybe there's part of the chain missing. Was there a liar, in between? Maybe the incredible scrutiny about just even his teachings. So at the end of the day, of course, there's a lot more to this than I can explain in this documentary. At the end of the day, I come away totally feeling that I have chosen the right religion, and that at the same time I have peace with Christians. Really, some of my very good friends are Christian. We have peace with each other. We can disagree with the doctrine, but agree with so many principles that are similar between us.
What sort of principles and morals do you think are the kind of present in secular society? And then I guess what are the principles and morality that you think are in common with Christians and Muslims that are maybe absent from secular society?
What I really liked about the Christians were their godly morals up to this day. And that really attracted me to Christianity. Like I said, the sexual activity between man and woman, it was limited to marriage. Many of the Christian parents, which later on I came to know when my kids were homeschooling, I came to learn a lot from them through the best way to homeschool your children, which was to give them the correct principles, bring them up godly, but dating was not part of it. It's okay for create socialization for the youth, but not let them go and be alone with each other, have sexual relationship with each other. They are the ones that they were my first teachers, which later on when I came to Islam, I basically adhered to it, and I noticed Islam is basically like the same, covers the same thing. But of course, later on, my children blame me for being too strict, while the Christians basically covered the same principles.
The pursuit of knowledge seems like something that's been very important to you throughout your life. Would it be okay if you just, it might be a bit cumbersome, but just list kind of the maybe year, university you went to, what you studied, and then maybe a bit about why you decided to study that?
When I came to Islam and realized after all these years of search and research, this is the right religion for me, I really was determined to tell other people about it. So I started talking about it. At the time, I didn't have any knowledge of public speaking or anything, just in smaller groups or in high schools and sometimes, universities, my own classes, I will talk about Islam. And this became more and more, it seems like I'm getting calls from more and more people to give a talk about Islam. As I was educating myself about Islam more and more, we have this 911 event happened. And then, oh my God, the media was going wild, just attacking Islam and Muslims. And it was like I'm listening to anything, any media I'm listening is just about Islam and Muslims in a negative way. So I thought to myself, am I going to be sitting and listening to all of this? I have to do something about this because they don't know Islam. I know Islam. I finally have come to Islam. It's like somebody's trying to take your child away from you. So I started actually increasing my talks. I offered universities to come and talk about Islam to churches, groups, associations, and they were very welcoming. And whenever I talked about Islam, I gave them a questionnaire, asked them, please to give me a critic because I'm not a public speaker, and I want to know if you learned anything about Islam. Is there something I should have said that I didn't answer questions? It was incredible. The people, the response they gave me was absolutely incredible. They really encouraged me to continue. They said there's so much they don't know, there's so much ignorance there. So the Americans are the ones that gave me the thought to go back to the university and study mass communication. It's like I knew, I'm not a public speaker. It's like my knees were still shaking when I'm standing in front of the people, but I knew that it was having a positive effect. So how can I reach, instead of a few hundred, how can I reach few thousand? How about few million? It's like I was on fire wanting to talk about Islam. Really, I was so adamant, but I didn't have the tools. So I decided I should go back to the university, learn about public speaking, journalism, mass communication, whatever source I can find in order to pass out information about Islam. And guess how old I was? By that time, I was 56 years old. I had some credits from 30 years back, university I had gone. So I went back to get my AA degree and finished it in 1 year. I went to Southern Oregon University, which is in Oregon. I was in California, driving every day, 40 minutes to go to the university to get my bachelor's degree. I did a 2-year degree in 1 year, from summer to summer, in overload units. I had really a hard time. My kids by then had gone by themselves, gone on their own. From there, I wanted to get my master's degree. This was not enough. The more I learned, the more I was anxious to learn more. And I have to say, this was not easy. I never thought I could even get a bachelor's degree because English was not my first language. So I really had to push myself. When my reading was slower, the vocabulary, I didn't understand everything, but it was a lot easier than 30 years back. So when I got my bachelor's degree, I considered getting my master's degree in US, but at the same time I considered getting the master's degree in an Arab country so I can also be among the Muslims and also learn the language. So I applied in American University in Cairo, which I know their degrees were acceptable in US. I thought maybe one day I would want to go back and get my PhD. I was getting brave. Anyhow, I got accepted. I moved to Egypt. By the time I moved to Egypt, my intention was migration. I sold my property. I sold everything I had. With 7 bags or suitcases, I moved. I thought I do not want to return, but it doesn't mean that my mission of bringing the knowledge about Islam to the American public would end. I wanted to go gain more knowledge, but use the mass media I don't have to be in front of the people in public. I wanted to give that information to them through internet, through TV, through anything that I could produce. So I moved to Egypt with sole intention of really not returning. So there I wanted to get the master's degree on communication, journalism, mass media. Ended up getting 2 masters in journalism, mass communication, and TV journalism. I mean, I was just like, at the time, I didn't even know how to turn on a camera, a movie camera. And most of the film in this documentary is shot by me. Most of it is edited by me at this time, but I've come a long ways to get to know as much as I have learned. And so this was my reason for moving there and getting this degree so I can serve Islam better.
You also mentioned that you decided, as soon as you moved to Egypt, that you never wanted to return to the US. What is the reason for you not wanting to return to the US?
It seemed like for the first time since I left Iran, I felt at home. I really felt these are my people. When I stood at the university mosque to pray, and I felt the touching the arm of ladies on both sides of me when standing next to each other. After the prayer, I started crying. The lady said, "Why are you crying?" I said, "I feel at home. I feel it's like I'm like everybody else. I'm wearing the hijab. I'm just like completely like everybody else. In U.S., I'm standing out. You know, I'm just what." And at that time, you're talking about early 2000s. You know, there was no situations like it is right now, which right now is the end of 2016. I'm talking with all this mass media, with Trump propaganda about Muslims and Islam. A lot of things has happened in a negative way towards Islam and Muslims. At that time, it was really, things were not so bad. But nonetheless, I felt that in Egypt, this is home. This is where I want to stay, and these are my people. I wanted to stay there long term, and I really wanted my son to come and join me there.
Why is it that you wanted your son to come and join you in Egypt?
I wanted my son to come and join me there because, as I mentioned, the life that I had, I lived in U.S. 36 years. Most of my life I lived in U.S. The secular life that I had, it had ups and downs, but it had more downs than ups. Morally, I went to gutter till by God's grace, He took me out, pulled me out, and my heart was open to receive spiritual guidance. And I felt like I hope to help my son to see what I went through so he would not commit the same mistakes that I did. I made the wrong choice for marriage. I made so many wrong choices, made so many mistakes that I will be actually facing and dealing with it the rest of my life. But now, having come to Islam, I deal with it with grace, but nonetheless, they're there. I have to deal with it. So I wanted my son really to leave that land, the land that gives you a lot of fun and good opportunities, at the same time morally basically makes you bankrupt. I was hoping he sees that, but unfortunately, I feel to this day, he doesn't see it that way.
It's interesting to talk about being kind of morally bankrupt. What do you think are the key principles or pillars of morality in Islam? And then, conversely, what do you think are the key principles of morality in secular cultures?
The principle of morality in Islam and Christianity is pretty close. God has given us commandments. It is as simple as that, like you shall worship only one God. That's the simplest commandment that all the prophets came to bring. And that you should not commit adultery, fornication. You shall not steal. You should not be a false witness. You should not commit your neighbor's wife. I mean, these are the principles that also the secular people, some of it they can adhere in terms of honesty, in terms of not stealing. Many principles could be adhered to in secular society. But where is God in the secular society? Secular society and democracy is basically man rules man. It's the vote of the man, human being, is that runs the country, runs the morality. The judgment, they judge everything according to the law of humans, not the law of God. So this is the difference. When we choose law of human beings, we don't necessarily go wrong because we live in a safe environment. When we choose the law of human beings, because every country has their own laws, I believe that we have to adhere. But when God is left out, basically the morality is left out, because morality is then based on man's judgment rather than God's judgment. So most Christians and Muslims that practice their religion, they want to protect themselves and their family to live according to God's laws and at the same time respect the law of the land.
How did you find it being a Muslim in the US?
Being a Muslim in US was completely okay with me and comfortable. The time when I came to Islam, it was in the late 80s and in the 90s when I got to know more Muslims, and it seems like being an American and being a Muslim, it was completely okay. We have our own groups community that we met. We did many activities together. Many of the kids grew up to be with other Muslims, but unfortunately my situation was that I really always loved nature, to live away from cities. So this was my pitfall. Being away from Muslims and wanting my kids to grow up in nature, that meant being away from Muslim community. Problem with this was my kids grow up learning about Islam but really not identifying as Muslims. So when the other kids go and play and do all kinds of things that in Islam we could not participate, obviously my kids would resent it. Maybe I should have moved to a Muslim community in the US, but nonetheless I didn't do that. My kids grew up in the mountains, in the river, in the trees and nature, which has made them a different personality, as different than the kids that grow up in the cities. But nonetheless, I felt completely, totally comfortable, totally being there as a Muslim until the time came where I felt that I preferred to live in a Muslim country. For me, that was a better choice.
You mentioned community a couple of times there. What is your idea of kind of a good community, and how do you think community differs in the US as opposed to Muslim countries?
I think community is very important for human being in general. Humans in general, they are more inclined, they're happier to be living in the community of like kind. I mean, you talk about going from the caveman and coming to different civilization, you see the communities are the result of growth. People grow depending on what kind of community it is. So in US, it seems like more and more it has become individualism. With all this media, everybody has their own mobile. It's a 5-year-old sitting in the corner of the house playing with their iPad or mobile or something like this. The family, the father, the mother, husband and wife, they have to SMS each other in the same house that lunch is ready, dinner is ready. The individualism has grown to such an extent that even the family bond has become weak. And then extended to community, the community is almost becomes like irrelevant. Who cares? Let me just handle my own stuff, my own things.
You've mentioned that you've lived in a lot of different countries. For the viewer, could you just give a little synopsis of every country that you've lived in and kind of a basic view of the society as you've seen it when you've lived in each country, and maybe the years as well?
Well, obviously I lived in Iran till I was 22 years old. I lived in United States for 36 years old, and I explained, as I mentioned before, all the goods and bads. It was really, I cannot say it was all evil. I really had a lot of good things that happened and good people that I met. My journey actually began in the United States. Maybe I had not moved to the United States, I would have never come back to Islam. So from United States, I moved to Egypt, and 7.5 years I was there, and it was fantastic. I thought I would never leave, but the political situation in Egypt just made it impossible for foreigners to live there. Then I have been actually living in Malaysia now for 4.5, probably close to 5 years. Actually, I've been here since 2012, and I feel probably this would be my final destination, hopefully, because I'm close to 70 years old now. I don't have the strength to move anymore. I love this country because people are very kind, they're very nice, and there are the Hindus and Buddhists and Christians and the Muslims and just about any and every nationalities and religions. They live among each other, work with each other, mingle with each other, as if they are one community. It's amazing how non-judgmental they are with each other. It makes a person, no matter what religion they come from, it makes them feel comfortable. A lot of people move here. They love to just migrate, live here because of how wonderful the people are. So, and in this country, basically, I spend a lot of time in nature here, in the island where I live. I feel at peace. I spend a lot of time with people that want to learn about Islam, or they have any problem, any issues. And I spend a lot of time producing videos, even if I'm talking myself or I interview someone, and many people end up watching them. My YouTube channel has over 300,000 views, and just this is one of my channels. This tells me maybe I'm doing something right. I used to give lectures, even up until recently, in Malaysia, where sometimes there are several thousand people are there to hear. I'm like one of the few speakers. I stopped even doing that because traveling has become more difficult for me, and I much rather spend less time, produce a video that more people can benefit, and I'm at the comfort of my home or my environment. And I would say that I consider myself probably one of the happiest persons in the world.